Okay, welcome to another episode of Testimony. We are back after the hiatus from the virus scare. And Clyde here is going to be our first new interview. So Clyde, tell us a little about yourself.
Well, my story starts like everybody else the day I was born. But my journey took a little different step on that same day. When I was born, my father was serving in the Air Force in Korea and was killed on that day. So I grew up without a father. I grew up in the home of a single mother. I didn't think it anything strange. I didn't realize any difference than anybody else. But what I did realize is something was missing in my life. And my whole journey through elementary school and junior high and high school, I felt something was missing, and I always thought it was the presence of my father. But it was only in later years I was to find out that what my heart was desiring was something else. In 5th grade, in Mr. Myers' class at Lemon Avenue, I would always sit in the class and look up at the wall at the United States map. And my eyes would always center on North Dakota, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and the UP. Little did I know at that time that that would become so important in my life, and I'll tell you about that in a little bit. But when I was 14 years of age, I was out front of my house kicking field goals over a telephone wire. And the Lord directly, I heard his voice say to me, "You're going to be a pastor." And I said, "Great, what's that?" You see, I never went to church. My mother never took us to churches in our childhood. She always wanted us to grow up and make our own decision. Though I had godly grandparents, my grandfather was a great leader in the San Diego area, started the pastor's prayer meeting with Ivan Sisk, started the chaplaincy program in a couple hospitals, the men's program at College Avenue Baptist Church, and was involved with Orville Butcher, starting Skyline Wesleyan Church, which later came under the leadership of John Maxwell. Many of you might know that name. So I had influence being prayed for me. I was working at an ice cream store, 31 flavors. That's what made me what I am today, is 3 years of managing an ice cream store. And our store was attached to a church, and that pastor would always come in and talk to me. Always invite me to church. "Hey, we're going to have some special singers this week. We're having youth night, Sunday night. You ought to come and be with us." But the people in that store always said, "Don't go there. They're weird. Those people swing from the chandeliers, roll down the aisles, and hurdle the pews." Well, they were a Pentecostal church, but I never went. But one day a young boy on my football team, a 9-year-old, came to me after practice and said, "Hey, Coach, how about coming to church with me tonight and seeing a movie?" Well, I just figured, church, Disney movie, no problem. Well, lo and behold, it was the movie The Cross and the Switchblade. And that's the night I gave my life to the Lord. As I answered the call, the altar call by Dave Wilkerson on that movie, went forward and knelt at the altar in that church and prayed to receive Jesus Christ. What was funny was it was the same kind of church as the one next to the ice cream store that I wouldn't go to. But here I am in a church full of men. And I never had a father in my life, but now I've got hundreds of fathers that took me aside and became my fathers and influenced in my life. Well, it wasn't long after that. That was in August of 1971. By September of 1973, I started my first junior high youth group. I've been in full-time ministry now for 47 years. Enjoying this part of the country, I am in Minnesota, northern Minnesota, up in the North Woods in a town called Biwabik. Every time I order something on the phone, they say, "What?" Nobody knows where Biwabik is. But we enjoy it here. But here, let's go back to that 5th grade elementary school class with Mr. Myers. I didn't realize till even just a few years ago that my dream of that part of the country was God laying my mission field before me. North Dakota, Minnesota, Wisconsin, the upper peninsula of Michigan, and even Iowa. You see, God put me here 30 years ago, and I love it out here, and I'm going to stay for a long time. I'm in my 8th year now here in Biwabik at the Biwabik Covenant Church. We enjoy the people, we enjoy the experience in the ministry. I've had opportunity over the years of pastoring churches in California, North Dakota, Wisconsin, Iowa, and now in Minnesota. And the fact of the matter is, 2 of those churches were right next to Bible colleges, so I developed relationships with Bible students. And those Bible students and I still communicate these days. I was in the early 90s, and some of them are lead pastors or missionaries around the world. But that's where Clyde Harvey is, and that's what God did with Clyde Harvey and made Clyde Harvey. I haven't walked in this journey alone. I was married 43 years ago to my wife, Jane. She's been a partner in ministry. She's been a blessing to me because of her music and her ability for music. In fact, we met at junior high camp in the San Bernardino Mountains of California. I was directing a junior high camp, and she had come to camp and volunteered to play music for us for the worship time. Then afterwards, she was on her way off to go back home. She wrote on the back of my picture her address because she was going off to Bible college at Bethany Bible College up near the San Jose area. And she wanted me to write to her. Well, we had only talked once at camp. Well, we talked that one time because she wanted me to know she was going to be 21 that weekend. She didn't want me to think she was one of the 12-year-old kids because she looked so young. But that was the beginning of a great relationship. We served together, pastoring in churches, in junior high ministry, and then one day God called us to separate from junior high ministry to be lead pastors. And our experiences have been great. God has used me throughout the nation. We've got great relationships across this nation, and we just thank God for the opportunities we've had.
Tell us about some of those opportunities. I know you've had the occasion over the years to meet some fairly well-known people. Tell us about some of the opportunities.
Well, being in the Southern California region, I was first a junior high pastor, and for 16 years I worked with young people. Those young people today are in their 60s, but they also are serving as missionaries throughout the world. They're serving as lead pastors. They're serving as volunteers in their churches. It's always good to hear that those that I've known for so many years are still faithful to the Lord and still serving. Being in Southern California, of course, I've already mentioned John Maxwell, but I also sat under the ministry of Rick Warren, Jack Hayford, Chuck Swindoll. They've all been influences in my life. I've had the opportunity, especially in the early years, to be involved in the Billy Graham ministry. They came to San Diego and then to Las Vegas, and I attended the Billy Graham School of Evangelism in both of those situations. And what a great opportunity that was for me, especially as a young man and a young pastor, to learn some concepts about evangelism. I also attended really early in my ministry, in probably about 1973, I went to the Campus Crusade facility at Arrowhead Springs. And there was a ministry conference for a week that probably was the most influential in my life. It was called the Ministry of Management. Administration is a gift I have. It's a gift that I had, but was really set on fire and developed in that. And I had the privilege there of working under Howard Hendricks, the great professor. In our church ministry in San Diego, we had the opportunity of rubbing elbows with some great men. One of my dearest friends was Chuck Buck, who has since passed on, but Chuck and his father developed what was known as buck knives. Many of you have used buck knives. Buck knives is not just a hunting knife, it's a brand of a knife, and they developed the push-button open blade. Company still is going strong. They left San Diego, they moved up to Post Falls, Idaho. In our church in La Mesa was a gentleman named Jack Goodall. Jack, in his college years at San Diego State University, in one of his business classes, developed a concept for a business that they wanted to take after college and start. And they created in that class what is known on the West Coast and perhaps into Texas, some other states, a fast food restaurant called Jack in the Box. Hey, Jack in the Box was good to me. Not only 2 tacos for 99 cents, but I worked there as a young man too. I did the graveyard shift. So I would work Baskin Robbins from 6 p.m. until 11 p.m., close that down, and go down the street to Jack in the Box and work there from midnight to 6 a.m. I want you to know I was the first one in the whole country to sell a breakfast jack. That was an egg sandwich made for breakfast, and hold it out the window. I'm special. Also in that same church, I had the opportunity of meeting a gentleman that you might know by his name, Joe Gibbs. Joe Gibbs Racing is big nowadays, but Joe Gibbs was a national football coach for the San Diego Chargers. He went on to win the Super Bowl with the Washington Redskins. And he has shared his testimony over and over. But I've had the great opportunity of meeting these great people. In fact, I'm sure there's one right here. Let's find out who it is. Hello, you're being recorded. Can I help you? Hello? Are you there? Well, let's get back to the camera. That's more important. But throughout life, there's been great opportunities. I consider mentors in my life. A lot of John Maxwell, a lot of Jack Hayford, Chuck Swindoll. I use the New American Standard Bible because Chuck used to teach from that. I used to be a part of Chuck Smith's church, the old Calvary Chapel. I was around in the days that were called the Jesus days, when we would drive to Costa Mesa and attend church in a circus tent where they would have their big concerts with Love Song and Second Days and all those different groups. I was at a concert where Larry Norman was introduced for the first time. Barry McGuire in our own church introduced second chapters of Acts. So I've had great heritage in my life. Some of the special things, though, are seeing the people change their lives. People that give their lives to the Lord and move on from there with a new life and a new lifestyle and a new beginning. It's always a great joy to receive someone into the family of Christ. And it's also a great joy to be a mentor, to give opportunity to young people and old people as well to ply the trades, to use the gifts that God has given them in ministry. 2 Timothy 2:2 says the fact that you should give unto those that you know, the things that you know, so they can pass them on to others. And that's what my whole lifestyle has been in ministry over these last 47 years. I enjoy sharing with people. I enjoy seeing people use the gifts that God has given them, whether that just be putting up a bulletin board or whether that be teaching a Sunday school class or starting a mission on the street, perhaps to the homeless, those types of things. We've enjoyed great relationships in those areas over the years.
Can you give us an example or two of some really challenging things you've had to face in life and how you saw God bring you through those things?
Oh, Here's a story. If you need a story, just come to Clyde. He's got stories for you. I was in my office as a youth pastor in La Mesa, California, and I got a call, and it said, Pastor Clyde, my mother has a co-worker whose son is dying of AIDS. Would you come and pray with him? And so I went to visit that young man. The gal and her mother and the young man and his mother were all there in his bedroom, and we talked. And his mother had shared with me that this young man had suffered. Of course, he's dying of AIDS. That's his own fault. I won't go into details, casting blame or anything, but he had restlessness sleeping at night. Well, I talked to him about the Lord. I talked to him about finding peace. I gave him the ABCs of salvation. Admit that you're a sinner. Believe that God could forgive your sin and confess your sin. And we prayed as a family and as a group right there around his bedside as this young man received Christ as his Lord and Savior. I have no doubt that when he closed his eyes and he went on to heaven, he is in heaven because of his forgiveness. Well, a strange thing happened afterwards. The mother came to me and she said, "What's your last name?" And I told her my last name, and she says, "Here." She went over to the shelf and she got his Bible, childhood Bible, off the bookshelf. And she said, he got this at a backyard Bible club. He says, the folks that gave it to him have the same name as you. Do you know them? And I opened it up and I looked at it. It was my grandparents. They used to host backyard Bible clubs every summer in their backyard and led hundreds of young people to Christ. Of course, we weren't involved with them as children, and I never went to one of those Bible clubs. What a difference my life could have made. But here's the funny part of the story. As Paul Harvey says, the rest of the story. As I was asked to conduct the funeral for this young man, and I didn't hold anything back. I preached a funeral, and I thought I did a great job, but that's not the point. It's up to the Lord. Was he honored? The mother came up to me afterwards, and she says, "Clyde, I want you to know that he was so restless as he came home, and we had him in our house, and he was in bed, and every night he couldn't sleep. He was so restless. But last night, the last night after you prayed, was the most peaceful night he had. And the next morning, he passed away." What a great thing to know that God can bring peace into your life. In our early days, we've been involved in major churches. You were asking me about some of the things. Being involved in big evangelism campaigns. We used to do Saturday night concerts, as I mentioned, with some of the songs like Love Song and Children of the Day, Chuck Girard, Barry McGuire, Leon Patillo, different groups that would come in every Saturday night. We'd have 1,000 to 2,000 young people that would come. But those weren't the difficult times. The difficult times were not the work. The difficult times were where you ran into young people that rejected the Lord. They knew what the reality was, but they chose to live outside that reality instead of serving the Lord, instead of giving up their lifestyle. I know how that goes. When I came to Christ, I was the town drunk. I would, in high school, every Friday night, I would get drunk somewhere, wake up Saturday morning wondering, where am I? But you know, when I came to Christ, I gave up alcohol. I gave up my use of marijuana. I never did use hard drugs. But I know what the struggle is. But I also know that if you're willing to give that up, God will give you a much better life than you had. Struggles deal with personalities. Some people will say if it wasn't for people, church would be fun. Well, I love to have fun with people. I learned in my first church after 16 years of junior high ministry and 8 years in there crossing over with Youth for Christ. I just took my first church and all I did was make it an adult youth group. You don't give up things when you come to Christ. You gain things when you come to Christ. Christ has good things for you. Everybody says, oh no, look what I'm going to have to give up. Oh no, look what you're going to gain when you come to Christ. But having the sudden death of somebody, we were on vacation one day and we were down in Branson, Missouri. We had never been there. We pulled in on a Sunday night, got a hotel room around midnight, was planning to get up the next day and visit Branson. We'd never been there, as I said. And I got a phone call at 6 o'clock in the morning that said, Pastor, Chuck died last night. We need you to come home. And it was an 8-hour drive, but we got in our car and drove straight home. Those are difficult times. There was a time in that church in Mason City, Iowa, where I became a friend with a bar owner across the street. And when I left Mason City and went back to California, he says, well, I'm sorry to hear that because I'm dying of cancer. He says, I was hoping you were going to do my funeral. That was the toughest thing for me to do, was to leave that community after hearing that. But we left, and he started passing away, and his family would call me at night, and I'd talk with him. But the privilege of the whole situation was his family flew me back to Mason City, Iowa, from where we were, and I was able to do the funeral service for Harold. That was a great moment. But it's always difficult when you lose dear congregational members, community members, neighbors. That's probably the most difficult part of ministry to me.
Well, that's really some amazing stuff. Do you have any final comments you'd like to say just to wrap up?
I love the Lord. You need to know that. The Lord is great. Sometimes you get stepped on as a pastor. Sometimes you step on others as a pastor. But the key is God loves you. We're in the middle of this coronavirus. And the key we need to understand in this whole situation is don't hold the problems in your own hands. Don't hold your worries. Don't hold your cares. Give them to the Lord. You see, if I was to hold a baseball, I don't know if I've even got one. I got a baseball up here. If I was to hold this baseball up, you know, this baseball in my hand may be worth $5. But you know, in the hand of the poorest rookie Major League Baseball player, that ball is worth $600,000. If I was to grab a football, maybe I'd go out and buy a $50 football and be excited about it. But in my hands, it's only worth $50. But in the hands of Tom Brady, try $80 million for that same football. You know, and it's true. In the Bible, if you look, you know, to me, I could get a little slingshot and try and shoot things. I was never successful with a slingshot, and it was a little kid's toy. But in the hands of David, King David, he killed a giant with that slingshot. And you can go in your yard, you can pick up a stick and just a dirty old piece of wood, and you can use it to chase away snakes or beat off something. But in the hands of Moses, he parted the Red Sea. You see, it depends on whose hands it is in. I could take 3 nails out of my wood shop and I can maybe make you a birdhouse or make you a little wooden cross to remember Jesus. But those same 3 nails in the hand of Jesus brought salvation to each one of us. But it's up to us to accept that. You see, the perspective on life is, whose hands is it in? Is that baseball in my hands or a major league player? Is that football in my hands or Tom Brady's hands? Is that slingshot in my hands or David? The stick in my hands or Moses? The nails in my hands or Jesus? And I ask you here as I close today, what's in your hand? I would hope nothing. You need to put your worries and your cares and your uncertainties in the hands of Jesus. Let God take care of you today, for you will solve nothing on your own. But if you don't know Jesus, you won't find that peace you're looking for. As I shared earlier, and Mike, if you give me a minute here, as I shared earlier, the ABCs of salvation. A is to admit you're a sinner. We are all sinners. We need forgiveness. We need to admit that we're sinners. Most of us won't admit that. We're too proud to say, I'm not a sinner. I've never sinned in my life. You're a sinner. You've sinned in your life. Look back somewhere. But then the B, you need to believe that God will forgive you, that He has the power to cleanse you. He sent His Son to the cross to die for you. Believe that. And then C, confess. Confess very simply, Lord, I'm a sinner and I need your forgiveness. And receive that forgiveness and live in that forgiveness. Find the joy of Christianity. Find the joy of life that comes through that relationship with a Savior, with a loving God. For He loves you, and He gave His only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in Him should not perish, but have everlasting life. Thank you, Mike, for the opportunity of sharing today.
Yep. And thank you for sharing with us.